Montana Territory, 1886. Dust rolled through Bear Creek like smoke from an unseen fire, carried on winds that whispered of change and possibility. The stagecoach jerked to a violent stop outside the general store, its wheels carving deep ruts in the mud-caked street. Margaret Whitfield stepped down, clutching a worn leather satchel that held everything she owned and scars she didn't speak of. At 26, she'd come west chasing freedom, or maybe just escape from a life that had tried to cage her spirit. Across town, beneath the shadow of the mountains that stood like sentinels over the valley, Samuel McKenna swung down from his horse with the practiced ease of a man who'd lived his entire life in the saddle. At 34, with grief carved deep into the weathered lines of his face, he carried the weight of a sprawling ranch, a hard-earned reputation, and an 11-year-old daughter who needed a teacher more desperately than his cattle needed grass. Two strangers, each running from loss in their own way, were about to collide in a place where survival was earned through grit and determination never promised, never guaranteed. A new beginning. The boarding house smelled faintly of kerosene and fresh-baked bread, the kind of place that tried hard to feel like home but never quite managed it. Margaret Whitfield set her trunk at the foot of the narrow bed and drew a deep, steadying breath. Her room was small, Spartan even, one rickety chair, one washstand with a chipped basin, one cracked window pane that looked out over Bear Creek's single muddy street. But it was hers. For the first time in months, she could close a door between herself and a world that had tried to break her. She unpinned her hat with trembling fingers, smoothed her dark hair, and reminded herself why she'd undertaken this journey. To teach, to start again, to prove that her life wasn't over at 26, despite what the men back in Philadelphia had believed. Downstairs, the landlady knocked briskly, her knuckles sharp against the wood. "Miss Whitfield, you've got company." Margaret's stomach tightened with unexpected anxiety. She wasn't expecting anyone, hadn't even unpacked her few belongings yet. When she descended the creaking stairs, the sight waiting for her in the narrow hallway made her stop cold, one hand gripping the banister for support. A man stood there, his broad shoulders nearly filling the cramped space, broad-chested, dust coating his worn boots, hat held respectfully in his weathered hands. His face was lined by sun and hard work rather than years, though his eyes looked decades older than his 30-odd seasons suggested. Beside him, half hidden in the protective folds of his coat, stood a girl with dark braids and weary, watchful eyes that had seen too much sorrow for her young age. Samuel McKenna cleared his throat, the sound rough as gravel. "You the new schoolteacher?" Margaret straightened her spine, meeting his direct gaze without flinching. "Yes. Margaret Whitfield." He gave a curt nod of acknowledgement. "Samuel McKenna. This here's my daughter, Rose. She's 11, bright as a new penny, stubborn as a Missouri mule, and in need of more than what I can give her out at the ranch. Figured I'd best make your acquaintance, seeing as she'll be in your care 5 days a week." Margaret smiled gently at the girl, who studied her with sharp intelligence that reminded her of a hawk assessing potential prey. "Hello, Rose. Do you like to read?" Rose's eyes flickered briefly with cautious interest. "Sometimes. But Pa makes me do chores first, always." "That sounds entirely fair," Margaret replied, her voice warm with genuine understanding. "Still, books can take you places that chores never can. Perhaps we'll find exactly the right one for you." The girl tilted her head, as if carefully measuring the worth of Margaret's words. Then she asked, with the bluntness only children possess, "Do you know about horses?" Samuel looked faintly embarrassed by his daughter's directness, but Margaret surprised them both. "Enough to keep my seat when one bolts unexpectedly. Why do you ask?" Rose's mouth tugged into the ghost of a genuine grin. "Because Pa says only horse sense matters out here in Montana Territory. He says reading don't keep you steady in the saddle." The exchange pulled the corner of Samuel's stern mouth upward for the first time, not a full smile. He wasn't ready for that kind of vulnerability yet, but something that softened the harsh angles of his weathered face. Margaret noticed the subtle shift and felt something unexpected stir in her chest. The landlady shuffled her feet, eager to return to her endless work. "Miss Whitfield, Mr. McKenna owns the biggest spread west of town. You'll be seeing plenty of his girl, I expect." Samuel adjusted his hat, his jaw set with determination. "I'll be direct with you, Because I don't have much use for fancy words or false promises. I need Rose taught proper reading, writing, arithmetic, scripture, and kept steady. I don't want her thinking she's above herself or getting ideas that don't fit ranch life. You think you can manage that? Margaret's chin lifted with quiet defiance, her eyes flashing. Mr. McKenna, I'm here to give your daughter far more than just sums and spelling. I intend to give her confidence, critical thinking skills, and tools to make her own way in this world. If that makes her above herself in your estimation, then yes, I can absolutely manage that. The words hung sharp and challenging in the narrow hall, cutting through the dusty air like a blade. Samuel's brows drew low over his eyes, his expression darkening, but there was something else flickering in his gaze, a spark of grudging respect that he couldn't quite suppress. Rose looked from one adult to the other, sensing the sudden tension that stretched between them like a taut rope ready to snap. For the first time since her mother's death 2 years prior, she felt a smile tug at her lips, small, sly, and somehow knowing that something significant had just begun. The schoolhouse. The next morning dawned clear but cool, with the distant mountains sharp as knife blades against a pale blue sky that promised autumn's approach. Margaret walked across Bear Creek's muddy Main Street toward the small clapboard schoolhouse, her practical skirts brushing against the ever-present dust that coated everything in this frontier town. The bell rope hung limp outside the weathered door, and several cracked windows let in more wind than light. Still, it was hers to tend, her domain, and she squared her shoulders with determination as she pushed the creaking door open. By 8 o'clock, a dozen children of varying ages filled the rough-hewn benches, boots muddy, braids uneven, voices carrying in the morning stillness. Some whispered and giggled, some jostled their neighbors, and one red-haired boy attempted to slip a grasshopper into the communal ink bottle when he thought she wasn't looking. Margaret rapped the desk sharply with her wooden ruler, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Sit straight, hands folded, eyes front. To her mild surprise, they obeyed immediately, recognizing authority when they heard it. She didn't have the imposing height of a ranch hand or the booming voice of the circuit preacher, but she carried something that stilled them, an air of expectation mixed with genuine respect that they instinctively responded to. Rose McKenna sat near the back, arms folded defensively across her chest, chin lifted as if she dared anyone in the room to challenge her position as the rancher's daughter. "Good morning," Margaret said evenly, her gaze sweeping across each young face. "My name is Miss Whitfield, and I'll not waste words with you. If you came here genuinely wanting to learn, we'll get on just fine together. If you came merely to waste my time, you'll find yourself outside chopping kindling before you can blink twice." A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the room like wind through wheat. Even Rose's lips twitched with suppressed amusement, though she tried valiantly to hide it behind her usual mask of indifference. By midday, they'd covered arithmetic problems, proper letter formation, and a challenging reading selection from Pilgrim's Progress that made several students furrow their brows in concentration. Margaret kept them engaged and busy, moving swiftly from one subject to the next with practiced efficiency, never allowing boredom to take root. By dismissal time, the children left with flushed cheeks and ink-stained fingers, but not a single one looked bored or resentful. Samuel arrived just as the last stragglers spilled out the schoolhouse door into the afternoon sunshine. He leaned casually against the weathered porch rail, muscular arms folded across his chest, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Well," he said slowly, "they're still in one piece. That's something, I suppose." Margaret dusted chalk residue from her practical skirts, meeting his gaze directly. "More than something, Mr. McKenna." They listened attentively, they participated, and they learned. Several showed genuine aptitude. His gaze lingered on her face a moment longer than strictly necessary, searching for something he couldn't quite name. "Rose mentioned you read to them actual literature, not just primers. You honestly believe that matters out here?" "I do," Margaret replied steadily, refusing to back down from the challenge in his voice. "Books open doors that cattle ranching and cornfields simply cannot. If you truly want Rose to grow into more than just a capable ranch hand, she'll need both kinds of education, practical and intellectual." Samuel's mouth pressed into a hard line, his jaw tightening. "I want her steady and grounded, not chasing impossible dreams that won't keep her fed when times get hard." And what if her dreams actually could? Margaret challenged softly, taking a step closer. What if limiting her now means she never discovers her full potential? For a heartbeat, tense silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant lowing of cattle and the creak of the aging schoolhouse porch beneath their feet. His jaw worked as he struggled with conflicting emotions, but he didn't snap back with the harsh words she half expected. Instead, he tipped his hat in a gesture of grudging concession and muttered, "Supper's waiting back at the ranch. Come by tomorrow evening if you're willing. Rose will want you there, and—" He hesitated, then added gruffly, "I expect I would too." The invitation, or was it more of an order delivered in gentler tones, left Margaret oddly unsettled as she watched him mount his horse and ride toward the distant mountains, his silhouette gradually disappearing into the golden afternoon light. The story continues as Margaret and Samuel navigate the dangerous territory of their growing feelings, facing rustlers, storms, and their own wounded hearts before finally finding the courage to build a new life together, one founded not on necessity or convenience, but on genuine love, mutual respect, and the unwavering belief that second chances are real, even in the harsh Montana wilderness.